the second one, and obviously I'm not going to evade it. I'm happy to answer any questions that are put to me. I want to just go through the record of what Hamas tried. What Hamas tried. It comes to power in 2006, in January 2006. Hamas didn't want to run in the elections. For those of you who remember back then, President Bush, who now as compared to what came after him seems like a veritable saint. President Bush was in this mode called democracy promotion. It was right after the invasion of Iraq. We're going to promote democracy in the Arab world. So they ordered the Palestinians to hold elections. Hamas didn't want to participate in those elections. They said those elections were part of what they called the Oslo process, which was just legitimizing the Israeli occupation. They didn't want to be part of it. They're pressured, and they finally agreed to participate. They didn't run in any ideological platform. They ran in a very simple platform. They ran on a platform of reform, because the Palestinian Authority is, and always has been completely corrupt. So it runs on the platform of reform, and it wins the election. What happens? First of all, Jimmy Carter, who was one of the observers at the elections, he pronounced them completely honest and fair. That's his words. They were completely honest and fair. Okay? So, what happens? Hamas wins the parliamentary elections, and they come to power. Hillary Clinton, that great Democrat, she says our big mistake was, she said our big mistake was we didn't rig the election. That was our error.
Sounds like something she would say.
Yeah. When she rigs the election, that's democracy, but when she claims Putin did, which of course is ridiculous, then that's not good. Only Americans are allowed to rig elections. So she says that was our mistake. So they come into power, and immediately this brutal blockade is put on Gaza, this medieval blockade, which has been pronounced on a couple of occasions. It's a crime against humanity, this blockade in Gaza. Most people don't even know the details. You know, they blocked any chocolate from entering Gaza. They blocked any potato chips from entering Gaza. They blocked any baby chicks from entering Gaza. They blocked any seasonings from entering Gaza. The list of things they blocked was so long that they discarded the list and then just drew up a list of what was admitted into Gaza. And if you read the memos at the time, it said the purpose of the blockade was to keep Gaza on the edge of collapse so that the people will overthrow Hamas. It was a calculated policy to force the people. For those of you who go way back, it was the same thing what Henry Kissinger said when the socialist government came to power in Chile, the Allende government. He said, we're going to keep turning the screws in Chile until, I'm quoting him now, the economy screams. And that's what they were trying to do in Gaza. So what did Hamas do? First of all, they tried diplomacy. Now some people snicker and laugh, ha ha ha. Hamas diplomacy, what a joke. You must be a Hamas apologist and propagandist. United States Office for Peace. It said Hamas was moving towards a diplomatic settlement of the conflict based on international law. There's a whole number of initiatives they took and were completely ignored. Then Hamas tried international law. After each of Israel's mowings of the lawn in Gaza, various human rights organizations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and also missions commissioned by the UN Human Rights Council. They go to Gaza to investigate what happened. Of course, Israel won't cooperate with any human rights investigation. You might wonder why, if you're naive, why it wouldn't cooperate. What does Hamas do? It's an interesting story. Nobody has said anything about it. The human rights organizations, the UN missions in the court, they were always ruthless with Hamas. They would say, you're guilty of war crime, you're guilty of crimes against humanity, you're guilty of this, you're guilty of that. And you know what? Hamas didn't care. It was willing, and it did cooperate with all the human rights investigations, even though the human rights groups like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, the UN missions, even though they said that Hamas is guilty of significant war crimes, in my opinion, highly exaggerated, but I can't go into that now. So, what happened? I'll tell you what happened. The reports came out. They were all very critical of Hamas, but also of Israel, and in fact, more so Israel in most cases. What happened to the reports? I'll tell you what happened to the reports. You know what happened to the reports? They were put in the desk and they collected dust. At the organizations and in my apartment. They sit in the bookshelves, thousands and thousands, I'm serious, and thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of reports where Hamas thought, maybe we follow this route, maybe something will be vindicated from this horror. Nothing came of it. So that route was a dead end. And then, in March 2018, and I will say, in part of my instigation, I kept saying you should try nonviolent civil resistance. I talked to one member of Hamas, a senior member, who we had I won't say talk, we had a steady correspondence. I thought it would work. Well, you know what happened? We know exactly what happened. Because there was a UN report issued after what was called the Great March of Return. And it's a 250-page report. It's single-spaced. And what does the report tell us? It tells us that Israel lined up its best snipers along the perimeter fence with Gaza. It tells us that every bullet fired hit its mark. Every bullet fired by those snipers hit their mark. And you know what they hit? Go read the report. The report says the snipers targeted children, targeted medics, targeted journalists, and targeted people with disabilities, double amputees. They targeted you. So when you read the horrors coming out of Gaza the past 16 months, about them targeting children in the skull and in the chest, for those who know the history, nothing new under the sun. In magnitude, of course, very different, but in quality, no, it's not new. Quantity, yes. Quality, no. And at that point, Hamas had exhausted all options. Tried diplomacy, tried international law, tried nonviolent civil resistance, and all of them reached a dead end. And that was basically, without trying to be dramatic about it, being factual about it, it was basically a death sentence for the people of Gaza. because by 2020, Gaza had vanished from the news. Some of you will remember at that point, all the talk in the town was about the Abraham Accords and what the Saudis would sign, and Gaza was just forgotten. This forgotten patch of land called Gaza. And it basically meant for the population, which is overwhelmingly a child population, most of the people who burst the gates of Gaza on October 7th, most of them have been born into Gaza after the siege, after the blockade. It's a fact that even I found quite surprising. Beginning in the 1950s, every outside observer who goes to Gaza keeps saying the same thing. You know, they keep saying, under the Egyptians, from the 50s to 67, and then under Israel, they keep saying Gaza is a concentration camp. That's not my language. That's not my inflammatory language. That's what everybody says. You know who includes everybody? It includes the former Israeli chief of National Security Council, Giora Eiland. Giora Eiland is a monster. He's a monster. He was the one, for those of you who are unfamiliar, who has been advocating the past 15 months. He said it's a good thing we could spread epidemics in Gaza. That's what he said. It's a good thing that we could spread epidemics in Gaza. So he's not a peacenik. And you know how he described Gaza in 2004? Quote, a huge concentration camp. So, they try diplomacy, it fails. They try international law, it fails. They try nonviolent civil resistance, it fails. Gaza by 2020 is forgotten. I've forgotten Gaza. I decided it was hopeless.
Why did they try suicide bombings?
Well, I tried, they tried everything. And by 2020, as I said, before somebody who's semi-retarded interrupted me, I said that even I had given up. I had moved on. I decided it was pointless. The last book I wrote on Gaza, it sold 370 copies, of which I purchased half. So it didn't seem any point anymore. So what did that mean? I said effectively a death sentence had been pronounced in Gaza. 60% of the people, young people in Gaza, 60% were unemployed. So what did that mean? They get up in the morning, and all they have to do, literally, is pace the perimeter of Gaza 26 miles by 5 miles. There's nothing to do. It's a living death. And those were overwhelmingly the folks who burst the gates on October 7th. So for those who want to criticize them, condemn them, attack them, I do think it's a fair question to ask. What were their options? What option did they have except to choose to be born into, to languish in, and to die in a concentration camp? What options did they really have? I won't go into that question right now. If you have, you can ask me during questions and answers. So that's the important point for me. The record what Hamas attempted. Now, the question is about the solidarity movement here. What have people attempted? What has worked? What hasn't worked? First of all, I would have to be certifiably insane not to support boycotts, divestment, and sanctions. Of course, those are just standard tactics. I go far back enough to be what was called the International Anti-Apartheid Movement, was in graduate school at the time, and we called for the university's divestment from South Africa. So obviously, and I was part of that movement. So, and it was also going way back. Anyone in my generation here will remember Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers Union. How many people remember Cesar Chavez? Just a few. And that was a very important struggle of the 1970s, the right of Chicanos to organize in the southwest of the United States. And the movement was led by the United Farm Workers. It was led by Cesar Chavez, who was a mixed record, I would say. But of course I was part of that. We were boycotting at the time grapes and wine. Those were the two, and the lettuce, grapes, wine, and lettuce, in support of the United Farm Workers. So obviously, on principle, I would have to be certifiably insane to oppose boycotts, divestment, and sanctions. My disagreements with the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, it's really two main things. Number one, the BDS movement was born in July 2005. And the date is important because it was 1 year after the International Court of Justice, which we talked about earlier, had declared that the wall that Israel was building in the West Bank was illegal under international law. And it called on Israel to not build the wall. Of course, Israel ignored the ICJ. And so the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement was born to try to create a popular movement to enforce international law. Because at the level of states, the law, as pronounced by the International Court of Justice, was being ignored. So the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement was born. And they have a platform. And the platform states that they support international law, the implementation of international law. And they said we have three main planks. Plank number one, end occupation. Plank number two, equal rights for Palestinians in Israel. And plank number three, implement the right of return for Palestinian refugees. That was his basic platform. It still is. That's their basic platform. And I said, my reading of the international law is the same as yours. Palestinians have the right of equality in the state of Israel. Palestinians, the occupation is illegal under international law. That's only recently been pronounced. But ending the occupation was certainly a legitimate demand. And the third was implementing the right of return. I said, but there's a problem here. Not a problem for me, but I believe a problem for you. Because whether you agree with it or not, international law also says Israel is a state and has the right to self-determination. Everybody knows that. That's not a controversial question. Israel is a member state of the United Nations. And every single document in the United Nations, every document in the General Assembly, in the Security Council, and including in the ICJ opinion of 2004, it said that to resolve the conflict, there have to be two states on the June 1967 border. The BDS movement, as many of you know, refused that aspect. They said they don't recognize Israel's right to self-determination. We're agnostic on that question, and we won't take a stand on it. I said, that's a problem, because the law is a package deal. You have a right, everybody in this room has a right to walk at the green. But if you have a right to walk at the green light, guess what? you have an obligation to stop at the red light. The two are reciprocal. Rights come with responsibilities. Rights come with obligations. If you walk at the green light and a police officer stops you, you can legitimately claim, I had the right. But if you walk at the red light and the police officer stops you, you can't say, well, I'm agnostic on the red light. I have a right to walk at the green, but I'm an agnostic on the red. No, you can't be. You can't pick and choose with the law. Either you believe in the law or you don't. And BDS, in my opinion, it remains the same as hypocritical. It wants the parts of the law that it likes. Just like Israel wants the parts of the law that it likes. It likes the fact that it's regarded as a state. It doesn't like the aspect about Palestinians also being a state. And if Israel's being hypocritical, so is the BDS movement, in my opinion. And there's a second aspect, which is, and I don't want to sound condescending here, I don't want to sound patronizing, and I don't want to sound like a know-it-all, because those are all obnoxious traits, and anyone who exhibits them makes him or herself look obnoxious. But politics is a difficult game. You have to study hard, you have to work hard, you have to think hard. It's not just one slogan. It's like, it's not abracadabra presto. And with the BDS movement, anything you say, it's just BDS. BDS. As if it's a panacea, a cure-all. No, you have to analyze each situation and base it on your determination in a particular situation. What's the best slogan? What will rally the most people? What can achieve the most at any given moment? And that's not easy. That's not easy at all to figure out. There are a few people who I thought were utterly brilliant at coming up with the right slogans. Sometimes the slogans are right, but they're horrible. One called Make America Great Again, but it resonated. But from the point of view of the movement and the tradition of which I consider myself a part, the most brilliant by far, was Bernie Sanders. He understood exactly how you build a radical movement. Number one, find those slogans that resonate with, as it came to be called after the Occupy movement, with the 99%. So what were his slogans? Everybody knows. Medicare for all, double the minimum wage, end student debt, end college tuition, Green New Deal. And then he just kept repeating it and repeating it and repeating it. And some people said, oh God, I'm so tired of him saying that. Can't he say anything new? No, he was very smart because he understood that your average American is not a political junkie. Your average American is going to only hear him once. We heard him 100 times. That's because we follow politics. Most people don't. So he was going to take every opportunity to keep repeating the slogan, get 10 new people here, 5 new people here, until there's a real movement. If you were asked me now, and hopefully we'll go into it in some detail, I think the most important slogan now is free Gaza, free speech. I think it has a real possibility of drawing the overwhelming majority on every college campus. Even people who don't care about Gaza, they care about free speech. That's just one of those sacred American values which everybody takes to heart. And right now, the struggle for free speech is inextricably intertwined with the struggle of free gossip. And I think you can get, in my opinion, you can get a supermajority on any college campus, any and every college campus in the country to support that slogan. You just have T-shirts on the back. It says Israel, Gaza, genocide. And the front it says free speech. And get people to wear it. You have a free speech, you have a free Gaza free speech every Wednesday. Ask people to wear those T-shirts. And then you aim for maybe April 1st. We're taking back our rights. Every college campus was setting up an encampment again. We're taking our rights back. In our Constitution, freedom of speech is inseparable from freedom of assembly. And if you go back as far as John Stuart Mill in On Liberty, he says it's impossible to support the right of free speech without supporting the right of free assembly. You have the right to set up the encampments. They were not an encumbrance on anyone. They did not block anyone. If you go from one college campus to the other, and I went to quite a few, there was always a harmonious relationship between the encampments and the rest of the community. Not everybody was prepared to make the degree of sacrifice to join the encampment. And then, a significant subtraction of your free time. And in many cases, a subtraction from the time you can focus on your studies. So a large number of people, they weren't prepared for that degree or level of commitment, but they supported the encampments. It's a complete fraud and fakery to say that those encampments were in a contentious relationship with the community. There were a handful of people who wanted to shut down those encampments and discredit them. And unfortunately, that handful of people had behind them a lot of money. There was this billionaire Jewish supremacist class, and they brought to bear their donor power because they gave a lot of money to the universities, and the universities folded one after another after another. It was the biggest assault on academic freedom in our country's history. It was. Now some of you might say, what about the McCarthy era? Okay, that was terrible, no question about it, but here's a simple question. How many college presidents were deposed during the McCarthy era? How many? During the past 15 months, the president of Harvard was deposed. The president of another Ivy League university, McGill, at University of Pennsylvania, was deposed. President Shafiq, another Ivy League university, Columbia, was deposed. That never happened before. It just didn't.
And our chancellor conveniently stepping down in May. Just so you know, Chancellor here at UWM.
And why is he stepping down?
Unclear.
And this is a challenge for the young people. It's a challenge for your future. It really is. There is a very dark shadow being cast over our country. It did not begin with Trump. That's just a factual lie. It began with Joe Biden, and it really even began with